Hi there, it's Blair from Wisecraft Handmade, and it's Quilting and Answer Thursday. Every Thursday, I bring you a video tip right here to help us all make better quilts. And today, we're talking about scissors. Most of the time I use a rotary cutter for almost all my cutting in the studio. I use scissors too, so I thought it might be interesting to show you what kind of scissors I use for what tasks. So here is an assortment of my favorite scissors, and let me go through and tell you what each one of them does. So for cutting yardage, when I don't have a cutting mat and a rotary cutter and I just need to cut a large piece of yardage or a lot of fabric, I will go for these guys right here. These scissors are made by Fiskars, and they're easy on your hands because they have this great spring load feature, which I love. They also lock. Locking them before you put them away protects the blade, and it also protects others from getting cut by them. So I like these a lot. I'll link to all of these below. For the same reason, for cutting yardage or larger pieces of fabric, I also really like my Kai scissors. These are about a 5-inch blade, and what I like about these is they're super lightweight, which makes a huge difference. I worked in the apparel industry for years, and garment sewing scissors are super heavy. These are very lightweight. They have sort of a rubbery handle that's kind of nice to grip. They fit really nicely in my hand. They're super sharp and tend to stay really sharp if you keep your usage for them straight fabric. So for just regular cutting at my cutting table, whether it's, cutting ends, dog ends off of piece units or things like that, I tend to go for these two pair of scissors. This was the first pair that I got in this size. These are also by Kai and also have that nice rubbery grippy handle, and they're also super lightweight. I like the size of these. I tend to get muscle memory and reach for scissors and like to have sort of a different shape of handle for each pair of scissors I use, so that I can almost reach for them without even thinking about it and just recognize what I'm grabbing by the handle. So that's why I wanted those different from the other Kai pair that I have in the longer length. I recently got these, about the same length of blade, different handle for the reasons I just mentioned. What I love about these is that you can't see it, but it has a tiny serrated blade. Now, I was told by the manufacturer of these scissors, the rep, that these will not dull, and if they do, you can send them back to Kai and they will sort of re-serrate and sharpen the edge, because I was worried about that. What I love about the serrated edge is this. Sometimes when you're cutting like really fiddly types of things, the fabric will sometimes slide forward just a little bit as you're cutting. With the serrated edge, it literally holds the fabric in place. It's really something that you almost have to feel rather, and you can even hear it a little bit too. It's hard to describe. It's easy to feel if you feel it. These serrated blades, which are super sharp, of course, work great. They just sort of give you a little bit more control over the fabric that you're cutting, and I love them for that. But both of these have their place, and one thing I did, I was using these upstairs in our family room, and I actually put a piece of fabric on there, tied it around the handle just to let my family know that those are fabric only. So now we're getting a little bit smaller, and these guys I use primarily for hand work and for fussy cutting of different things. I was so excited about the serrated edge in the slightly larger size that I got a serrated edge in the smaller size too. I think that these blades are about 2.5 inches long. I think both of them are about the same. Different handles, still really lightweight. I honestly tend to use the serrated edge a little bit more because I really like the control. If I'm trying to do some super fussy cutting, maybe I'm cutting out a motif or something like that, I really like those. I also really like these tiny ones if I am cutting little motifs out of lace or things like that, which I sometimes do to add to different things I'm working on. And also what I really love about the size of these types of scissors is that I can just throw them in my bag. They're not unwieldy. They're really easy to use. These are also both by Kai. And finally, the thread snips. Now, as I mentioned, I worked in the apparel industry for many years. I often had to visit factories that were making our salesman samples and walk through the line. And at the end of the sewing line, you would often hear this snip, 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 which was the most pleasing sound I've ever heard, or one of the most pleasing sounds I've ever heard. And I realized that it was the finishers at the end of the sewing line. They laid out the garment and they snipped all of the loose threads. I realized then also how vital these are. I have these listed in my shop, my favorite little thread snips. I keep these in my sewing bag. I keep them by my sewing machines. I keep them everywhere, and they're super handy. I will use them not only to snip threads, which they're just perfectly made for that. I also use them sometimes to take out seams, things that I would use a seam ripper for. So sometimes I will just snip all of the threads. Also, you know how sometimes when you press your seam allowances to one side or the other, and then you add another piece and you realize that the seam is flipped like that? A lot of times I can take these and just snip into the seam just a little bit to just turn it the opposite way and press it flat without snipping into the seam, of course. So I'll link to all these scissors below, but I would love to hear what your favorite scissors are and why. Scissors are fascinating. We all have lots of different pairs that we love, pairs that we don't love, but we don't get rid of. So it's a fascinating topic. I'd love to hear what you have to say. In the meantime, you can find more tips, tools, patterns, and tutorials at my website, wisecrafthandmade.com. And as always, I will see you next week.